Hello and welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I'm your host and interviewer each week for 6 years, twice weekly, where we interview thought leaders, luminaries, academics, best-selling authors, creators, artists, people of all walks of life on Tuesdays and Fridays, and use Franklin Covey's global distribution and brand to bring to you hopefully well-curated, piercingly insightful conversations, all designed to make you a better leader. On the heels of our co-founder's success, Dr. Stephen R. Covey, who wrote the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Franklin Covey has become the world's most trusted leadership firm globally. I've been honored to be associated with the company for nearly 30 years, 6 of them as the host of this podcast. Today, our guest is joining us from London, England. Her name is Meggan Roxanne, and she's the author of the book, How to Stop Breaking Your Own Heart. She's the founder of TheGoodQuote.com. And let me tell you, before I welcome her to the podcast, I read a lot of books. You can imagine I read several hundred books a year for this podcast and the others that I host. I'm also a literary agent, so my life is full of reading people's books. And what I found about Meggan's book, How to Stop Breaking Your Own Heart, is I couldn't read more than 3 or 4 pages without putting it down and just thinking about what I've read, applying it. Do I understand what that means? I've heard that phrase, but does it make sense in my life? And so today, this could be a 4-hour conversation. We have about 30 minutes. I have 5 or 6 fairly deep questions to ask. Meggan Roxanne, welcome to On Leadership.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Hey, so you have written a masterpiece, which I have thoroughly enjoyed reading and now sharing on this podcast. Before you wrote this book, though, you actually founded a community, an enterprise called The Good Quote. Would you take a few minutes, and talk about what is The Good Quote, how many people are involved in it, why do they come here, and maybe how did that help to instigate the writing and publishing of How to Stop Breaking Your Own Heart?
So The Good Quote is an online community. It started on Tumblr in 2011, and I migrated over to Instagram in 2014. It is a platform where I create a consistent feed of motivational content. I've been doing it just myself and my business partner for the last over a decade now on Instagram. It's been a fantastic journey. We have had many pathways of trying new things. We had an agency. We still have an agency. We have a small publishing house where we work with independent writers and help them bring out products and books. We have a storefront, and then we were pushing myself, a personal brand. But we also worked with the likes of Jay Shetty and Stephen Bartlett, Lewis Howes, VaynerMedia, helping them just grow their communities. And this all stemmed from, I guess, something that I was doing at uni in order to make money. When I was younger, I was growing Facebook pages and selling it to people, and that's how I was able to pay my rent at university. And then it just went on. So I always had an inkling and a passion for building communities. And that did lead me to writing this book. You know, for me, The Good Quote was born out of my personal experiences and exactly with the book, and just having the opportunity and to share my story to my audience. It's been a fantastic journey of bringing me to this point 10 years later. But The Good Quote for some people is an online sanctuary, it's an online safe space, or for others, it's just a consistent feed of motivational quotes that helps add value to their day. And that was really the intentions behind it. I was going through a depression at the time when I started The Good Quote, and I was going through a depression at the time I started both blogs, and I realized how difficult it was to find an online community that had constant motivation and encouragement. So I basically just created it for myself. And lo and behold, 24 million people 10 years later seem to find a home here too.
Well, plus me. When I first saw your book, this is not the kind of book that I would think was about me. I don't have a history of breaking my own heart, so I thought. But then I got into the book and I just could not put it down. About every 30 or 40 of these interviews, about 3 times a year, I will conduct these interviews by just reading a quote out of the book and inviting the guest, the author, the thought leader, to opine, to riff on it. And that's how we're going to organize the next 25 minutes of this conversation. I have 4 or 5 sections I'd like to read back to you of what I wrote. I'm going to invite you to take 3 or 4 minutes to weigh in on what you meant and maybe tease out some deeper insights. You ready to roll?
Let's go.
Our guest today is Meggan Roxanne. She wrote this book, How to Stop Breaking Your Own Heart. I'm going to read you a passage from page 10. Without intervention, the impact of our upbringing can last a lifetime, shaping our behaviors, our values, and even our emotional boundaries. It seems to me, Meggan, that a strong genre of what I am reading right now, what I'm interviewing, is about understanding your origin story, understanding epigenetics, understanding the good and the bad that your caregivers, your caretakers, your providers, your parents poured into you, usually well-intended, but not always. Yep. You write about that. I'm going to reread the phrase and have you talk about it because it really hit me as very timely. Without intervention, the impact of our upbringing can last a lifetime, shaping our behaviors, our values, and even our emotional boundaries. Would you address this in 2 points? Would you talk about why this was personal for you, and what might you invite our listeners and viewers to think about as it relates to the impact of their upbringing?
Well, first answer, I had to do a lot of deep assessment into my own character before I wrote this book. And I realized that a lot of the habits and patterns that I adopted throughout my life actually came from my mother, my community, but mostly my family. So the kind nature within me, I always like to say the best thing I inherited from my mother was her kind spirit. But I also was accustomed to watching her struggle with how to deal with, members in my family. And I then also adopted those struggles too. But thankfully, I watched her go through therapy. I watched her heal and rectify and also teach me and encourage me to make better changes. But those are still the things that I had to implement. Also, when I wrote that passage, I was talking about the impact that the people around you have on you when you're a young child. One thing that people don't seem to remember or realize is that children grow up. Children grow up. So the things that you say to them or the things that you do to them, they don't forget. And I didn't forget. And unfortunately, a lot of the things that were said to me as a child, they worked their way into my brain and they became my negative inner voice. And so through therapy, it was brought to my attention that the impact of our surroundings, the communities that we're raised in, have a direct consequence to our overall self-esteem, our value system, and the way that we love ourselves. And I thought it was really important to put that in the book because these are snippets of lessons that I've learned. And I focused on that and I moved on to people pleasing. And I spoke about an example of how I allowed people pleasing to, deteriorate my mental health and also allow me to work opposite my best interest. And again, these are all the consequences of the impact of our upbringing. The difference is we all have a choice of what it is that we decide to bring into our reality. And as people, we have to become self-aware through therapy, and then we are able to create a better reality for ourselves. And I think it all starts with self-awareness. And through that, again, it leads back to that passage. Self-awareness made me realize that a lot of the things that I'm struggling from are coming from my upbringing, things that have cemented themselves in my brain or in my heart. And these are the first things I needed to do, I guess, in the shadow work of being able to restore my inner harmony and also adding more positivity by removing these things and people or habits from my reality. Does that make sense?
It does. And in fact, building on that, I've read recently and I've come to embrace the fact that we also will tell our stories based on what we want to believe, right? I mean, it's interesting. My father passed about 2.5 years ago, and I was raised in a very stable, healthy, middle-class family in Central Florida on the East Coast of the U.S. And my brother and I were the only two children in the house. He's 4 years older than I am, and not a lot in common, but we're very civil. We're actually friends. And my brother and I have a very different story of our lives and our upbringing. We have a very different story of how we were choosing to remember my father's life, his a little more critically, I think mine a little more charitably. We remember the facts similarly, but how we are choosing to tell ourselves our story about that is dramatically different. I think it is consequential for us to think carefully, deliberately, and charitably about the impact of our upbringings and the stories we tell ourselves about those. Because we can create whatever narrative we want to, positive, negative, moving forward, held hostage. We have a choice on how we deal with that going forward, don't we?
Yes, I mean, in therapy, one of the things that I had to learn, because I did two years, I'm still doing therapy, but I did intense therapy after my mother passed away, and I really just brought forth everything that I was suffering with. And my therapist always says, 50% of therapy is self-awareness, and he actually made me aware to the stories and the narratives that I was holding myself to, and the language I was using when I was speaking to myself. And again, these languages, these practices, they were coming from things that I was told when I was younger. And when we broke it down and really tried to find the truth in them, there really wasn't that much. It was all me ruminating and creating, I guess, I don't know, even convincing myself that this issue is this bad, when really it was quite minute or quite small. And so, yeah, I think language has a huge gosh, I keep freezing. I'm so sorry.
No, I love it. I think you're right. Our language has a consequential narrative on our stories and how we choose to live through them. Let's move on, because you also write a chapter about perfectionism, which is not a term that I really resonate with to describe me, but I'll bet my children, my 3 sons, would describe me as a perfectionist. So your chapter on this kind of pulled me in. And I'm not a self-help hypochondriac. Like, I don't believe everything I read is about me. That's called narcissism, probably. I have some of that too. Let me read a passage from you from page 18, where you title it, "The Root of My Perfectionism. The mission to become perfect stemmed from multiple times in my life where I was rewarded for being anything other than my authentic self. I learned how to perform and spent years beneath this disguise. So much so that I struggled to develop a real relationship with my authentic self. I became everything everyone wanted me to be." I mean, that paragraph spoke to me so well. Riff on that.
Yeah. When you are raised in a narcissistic family, everybody has a role that they play. So my mother's role was the scapegoat and caretaker. She was one who had to basically clean up all the mess and look after everybody, and also still take a lot of abuse from people, and no real consideration or thanks or reciprocation to any of her efforts. So I grew up seeing that, and I think that installed the people pleasing into me. And I realized that, when I went to school, and the part of the story in the book was I went to school and I had to learn how to be good because I went to a different school. I was removed from my first school and went to a Catholic school, and I was still trying to be naughty. And I realized that when I just conformed and slotted in, I was actually being the model student, or, the person that everybody wanted me to be. And it did reward me, and I believed that it helped me as a child understand the importance and the difference between being good and being bad, and the rewards that come with being good and the consequences that come with being bad. And I think at that time, I just realized, if I just be what everyone wants me to be, then I will be fine and I will be left alone and I won't disappoint anybody. But what happens is you start to sway far away from yourself, and you have this character that you're almost trying to maintain. And what happens during that is there's going to be a time when you snap. There's going to be a time where you're no longer in sync with this role that you're playing. And eventually you have no other option but to go back to the source, which is yourself, and to have a deep dive and look at what it is you're actually doing these things for. What are you people pleasing for? Who are you pleasing? Why have you convinced yourself that they are more valuable than you? Why are you putting yourself second and operating at their best interest rather than focusing on yourself? These are all the things that I had to look at and learn. And at the same time, what I did learn from assimilating and I guess conforming into better character, good behavior, is that, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. It's progress. It moves you forward. But I still had to learn how to be authentic to myself.
I'm not sure I know what that means. I'm not sure I know what that means. We hear this phrase a lot about knowing your authentic self, being true to yourself.
Yeah.
I'm 56 years old. I don't know my authentic self. I'm a smart guy. I've written 8 books. I host a podcast. I own an agency. I've been an executive of a global company. I'm married for 15 years. I have 3 sons. I'm white. I'm a male. I'm Catholic. I'm American. I'm Republican, kinda, used to be. I'm a capitalist. I know who I am from a label point of view, but I don't have any clue who my authentic self is. I say that not angrily. I say it sort of passionately with some vulnerability. Tell us how someone like me understands who their authentic self is. Was there a process? Is there a discovery? What would you share with someone like me? And I think I speak for the vast majority of the world that talks a good game. I like myself. I'm a fine person. I have strong character. I'm a good provider. I'm a loyal friend. I'm a competent associate. Check, 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 check. I don't know who my authentic self is.
Well, maybe you have found your authentic self, because it sounds like you have everything in store. But for me, the way I had to find my authentic self, especially through all of like unlearning all of these bad habits that I've adopted along the way, was I was still unhappy. I was still miserably unhappy. I had a great platform. I have great friends. I've got a great partner. I drive a nice car. I've got a book deal and all these. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I think it's about honoring the stage that you're at. It's about accepting that things in your life have changed and that you have to move forward without these things. For example, when my mother passed away, in that instance, I didn't know who I was. And for the past 3 years, I've been rebuilding myself, a new person, a new version of myself in a world where she doesn't exist and in a new reality where she doesn't exist. And things have been completely opposite to what it was that I was used to. I think through change, through growth, you have to reassess with yourself because things evolve. So you sound like you know your authentic self, but for me and for many others, there's still questions as, am I happy? If you find yourself asking these type of questions, then surely there's a lot more searching to do. For myself, I like to journal because one day I can feel great about something. And then when I read back on that journal, I could realize, oh, actually, I needed more time to do X, Y, Z, or I needed more time to digest that. I prefer to do meditation. I prefer to go away, have retreats, have solitude time. I'm trying to figure out how to overcome new habits. I'm trying to redevelop my relationship with God. Like, these are all the ways that I believe I'm trying to find my authentic self. I don't think finding your authentic self is our overall destination. I think it's something that you consistently do. And I think it only fails when you stop doing it. You always have to find yourself because things are changing. And for when you know that you're working against yourself and you feel that confliction within your spirit, you know you're not living in your authentic self. So if you seem to be fine with everything that you have, that's great. And if there's many people like you who don't see that there's anything in their lives that need to be changed or fixed, then that's a great place to be. That's a fantastic place to be. But I don't believe that it stops there. I believe that there's always going to be room for growth. And once there's room for growth, there's always going to be room for assessment.
That was beautifully said. By the way, your book has definitely challenged me on what I thought I knew, and that's a compliment, not a critique. You wrote, it's impossible to meet your genuine self when you're constantly under the shadow of someone else's expectations. I mean, that's true from our family, from our leader, from the culture of the organization that you're employed by. And I think there was so much transference from your book that primarily is about your life in the personal setting, less the professional setting. But there's so much that transfers over because it's impossible to be or to meet your genuine self when you're working for someone who is your leader, your boss, and the only way to placate them, to impress them, is to be someone you're not. Or working in a culture where the culture may be great for other people, but it's not great for you to thrive and to be your authentic self. What advice would you give people that may be working for someone or in a company or organization where they find themselves in the shadow of someone or some organization's expectations that aren't helping them become their best self?
Yeah, so I had a conversation like this with my mother years ago because I felt that way in every single educational spot that I was in, whether it was school or college or university. And the reality is, we live in a world where you actually have to conform. I've been a rebel my entire life, and I'm getting to the age of 36 in a couple of months' time, and I can't do it anymore. And it's gotten to a point where I actually have to conform to certain things. And that's just all a part of being an adult and being grown. I think what it is that we can do is acknowledge that we have to divide the day into two. There's half of the day that we have to give to somebody else in order for them to reciprocate our efforts with money so that we can go and live a great life. And then there's the other half where you wake up in the morning, you're getting ready for work, or you come back and you cook and you have time for yourself, and that is your time. That is time for you to delve into yourself as much as possible. And I don't know if this is the great advice, but this is just basically what I was told growing up. Until you are in a position where you own your own time, where you have to separate your day into two, and the times that you do, you're going to have to separate your day into two and give half of your day to somebody else in order to strive, and unless you own your own time and you work for yourself, and the other half of the day is the most important. That is what you get to do for yourself, and it is your responsibility to ensure that those hours are highly so it's your responsibility to ensure that those hours are working towards giving you harmony, helping you grow in things outside of work, or even just pouring back into yourself. But we live in a society where we have no other options but to split our days into two, but to give somebody some of our best hours and reserve the time that we have left over for ourselves. That's literally it. There's some things in this life that I don't like to do that I have to do. And there's things in this life that I make sure that I prioritize myself first and put other things second. It's a balance.
This book is full of truth bombs. When you decide to reclaim your time, the people who've had infinite access to you will feel like you're stealing from them. Another page says, true stillness and solitude are the main components needed to explore the depths of our being. When we practice turning inward, we become aware of the whispers within. Another page I'd like you to opine on is the following. I'm going to read you a passage out of your book. It's actually on page 20. It's actually within the perfectionism aspect, but it has more to do with comparison. Our idea of perfection is flawed. We measure ourselves against others without recognizing that we're all walking a unique path that was destined solely for us to pursue. We never find our true essence by emulating someone else, because while they're naturally living in their truth, we neglect our magic by mirroring their methods, hoping to have a life like theirs. Yeah. And here's where you lower the hammer. It's such a devastating form of self-betrayal. Good grief, girl. So I want you to talk to us about how does healthy comparison coexist with not sort of giving up our uniqueness that becomes self-betrayal? Because there's great benefit in aspiring to be like someone. I like that behavior. I like their success. I like their discipline. And so how do you manage the healthy coexistence between maybe aspirational comparison and where that turns into self-betrayal of being your own self, knowing who you are, fulfilling your own authentic life that only you can live?
First of all, I love these questions. I really do. Um, so okay, so to answer that, I think it's I think it's lovely that we're in a space that we can look at other people as inspiration, whether it's their work rates or whether it's the ideas that they've used, especially within the same space and they're moving further, or they're doing things completely different. I think it's lovely to be inspired by people. I love creativity, I love innovation, I love disruption, and I love being around people who want to bring forth change, into this life, and they use, their daily waking hours to do so. I think that's so commendable. So for me, the way that I've had to navigate around that, because it's normal for creatives to compare, and to and to almost downplay the things that you do, is to just give myself the grace in knowing that I'm still trying. I'm still trying. And what works for them is fantastic, but I still need to find what works for me. So I can be inspired by somebody doing great things, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to turn back and look at myself and berate me because I don't look at, or I'm not performing or creating as great as them. That's not the case. If anything, that just shatters the self-confidence that we're trying every day as people to build. I think one of the best things is networking and collaboration. I think it's a great opportunity to look at somebody else's skill set and see, if we're going to compare to what it is that they've learned that I haven't. If they're great at Photoshop, for example, and I'm not, then get on Photoshop. For me, I just see it as examples of how it is I can do better. I don't really look at somebody else and think I want to be just like them, because number one, I don't know what it took for them to get to this point. I don't know what they had to sacrifice or lose to get to this point. If somebody says to me, oh, I would love to have 24 million followers. Okay, would you like to lose both your parents and 16 elders and 3 friends in the space of 2 years? Would you like that? Because that's what came attached with this story. So I can't look at somebody and envy where they're at or envy what it is that they have. All I can do is turn it back onto myself and say, okay, with what it is that we've just witnessed or what it is that we're inspired by, how can I turn that round and make myself just as good? And I literally use my energy, use my craft, my design, my aesthetic, and I take on the skill sets that other people have. And if it works, it works. I move forward. If it doesn't, it wasn't meant for me. I think the way that we handle life is just we get so caught up in we make things so final when we always have room to grow. I had a quote the other day that said, "There's always enough earth to rebuild your foundation." There's nothing wrong with failing and starting again. There's nothing wrong with having an idea and seeing somebody else execute it and still trying to find a better way to do it. I will also look at how, if it is that we're in direct competition, I would also look at, the ways that, our audience or our customers are communicating with them. And if they have a formula that works better than mine and I'm seeing better results on their side, I would generally study what it is that they're doing and try and find ways to implement something similar into my business or into my craft. But to take somebody's spiritual, intellectual property, something that's been given to them, whether it's a gift or a purpose, and to try and put mine to the side and adopt theirs, it's basically telling myself that what it is that I've created isn't good enough. And I had an elder one time that said to me, it's really important to validate every single idea that your subconscious gives to you. Because could you imagine if you gave gifts to somebody every day and they just ignored it or threw it away, or that's rubbish? It's very important to, nurture our ideas, write them down, meditate on it, work on them slowly. I think we have so much value in ourselves that we overlook the things that we could be building, which could be just as great, because we're too busy comparing somebody who probably are 10 years ahead of us or 5 years ahead of us or have a bigger team than us or have more support. Like we don't see the behind the scenes pictures. We don't see any of that. We just see what's in front and we compare. And it's such a tragic place to be as anyone. It doesn't even have to be a creator. It could be somebody at work who's performing better than you. It's a great opportunity to grow. It's a great opportunity to look within and grow. I don't understand comparison. I only understand the inspiration behind it. I would never like to see myself in a place where I put aside everything that I've worked on because what's working for them works, and losing faith in my own thing. It's sad. So the best thing for me is to just, the advice that I would give would be just to use the opportunity as a reason to grow.
That was a great TED Talk you gave right there. We'll send that to you, and you'll get a couple 100 million views on that one. Okay, last topic. What is self-love, and what is it not?
To me, self-love is a form of self-accountability. It's being accountable of yourself, whether it's waking up in the morning on time or staying in contact with people who bring joy into your life, or whether it's like sticking to a goal or just being consistent, replacing old habits with new habits. It's always you're always operating in the best interest of yourself. That to me is what self-love is. I don't think self-love is going to the spa for the day, or eating your favorite cupcake, or doing things that surface level investments that don't last that long. I think self-love is being strictly accountable of ourselves, is holding ourselves with high expectation and high regard. I believe that self-love is also having a great relationship and acknowledging the source, God. I believe self-love is also something that once we love ourselves enough, it impacts the people around us. We become an example of how to love ourselves, and people who are observing that will then it encourages the people around us to love themselves. I mean, self-love really is just the deepest investment you can make into you, without having to make apologies for it or having to, I think it's the deepest investment you can have into yourself.
Meggan Roxanne, your book is How to Stop Breaking Your Own Heart. You are the founder of TheGoodQuote and a profound thinker. Tell us, as we end, what's next for you? What's on the horizon?
At this moment, I'm really just trying to get this book into as many hands as possible. This is life work. This is something that has been on the table for years, and it's really beautiful to see that it's here in the physical. The next thing for me is to get to a point where I can focus on the second book. I'm trying to focus on signing new writers to TheGoodQuote, and also start rebuilding my publishing house and working on my personal brand.
Well, it's been nice meeting you. I appreciate you coming on today. I'm a big fan now, and I've thoroughly enjoyed the book, and I will do my share of recommendation on my platforms as well. Meggan, nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you, Scott. Thank you for having me.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.